Hello everyone, we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince!
Vince, today's question comes from LaserDude99.
Hey, what up, Laser Dude?
Yeah. Here's his question. So, I was looking for some information about the next Hunger Games movie, and I found out the third book is being split into a two-part movie. Where have we seen this before? Yeah, we have seen this happening more and more lately with Harry Potter, Twilight, The Hobbit, or even The Dark Knight Returns, making either making a two-parter or more than one movie out of one story. What do you think are the things needed in a story to make a two-part story, and when do you think it's not needed? I think this is a great question. He's right, this is something that's been popping up a whole lot lately, and I'm going to let you field it first, Vince. Just straight up answer the question. When do you think it's a good idea to split a story into more than one film?
I think it's a good idea to split a story when one of two things happen.
Okay.
When both things can happen, I suppose. When you have enough stuff in a book to merit having two films. When you have enough things that you say, I just cannot omit any of this in order for this story to make sense by the time we get to the end.
Or enough of it.
So, so if you're going to end up with a 6-hour movie, you might as well split it into two movies. You'll make more money that way. And nobody's going to judge you for it. Fine. Whatever. But
well, yeah, and that's not just about making more money. That's about being nice to the audience.
Yeah, because 6 hours.
A lot of us, there's a reason you're not going to make enough of your money back when that happens, because a lot of us are going to say, I don't have time to go sit in a theater that long.
Yeah, but you spread it out over 2 years, you're going to see two movies. Why not?
Yeah, sure.
So that's the thing. And then the other thing is that when you have a movie that makes sense to make that a movie, like if you have a book that has a discernible midpoint that could cut and be a cliffhanger but still feels like a full story, then you can do that too. Maybe that's a shorter movie. Why not? But that's where I think it is. And in fact, this really... Can't use those words. This really annoys me when they make movies like The Hobbit Part 1. I have, or whatever they're going to call it, Unexpected Journey.
Yeah.
I have a lot of hope for Parts 2 and 3, because, maybe they'll put the stuff that actually, was interesting from The Hobbit into those movies. But
you think they stretched that?
The Hobbit Part 1 is super stretched, and it's dull, and it doesn't need to be as long as it is. That movie could have been an hour long. and you would have, by the time you got to the end of The Hobbit, Unexpected Journey, you would have said, cool, so when are we going to get to the rest of the story?
I was with the camp. I was with the camp before that movie came out that said I was already wondering about this being two movies, but a trilogy.
Yeah, I could have seen it being. What's weird to me is that why would you make The Hobbit a trilogy, but then make the 3 Lord of the Rings books?
Truncate them.
Why would you make that a trilogy when there's 3 books? If you're going to split something up, you should have split up Lord of the Rings, not The Hobbit. You should have taken the one that's shortest of all of them, and then make it 3?
And Vince, that is a fantastic segue into the big point I'd like to make, which is I think that there are a lot of places where this makes perfect sense, but it gets really lopsided when it's obvious that you did it, that when you finally thought to do it, it was for monetary reasons and nothing else, or not enough else, right? And the reason I say that, and frankly, it doesn't even matter what the reasons really were, it's gonna look that way, right? When you, and Lord of the Rings is a perfect example, I think Harry Potter is a good example. It made sense to split the last movie up into 2. It also would have made sense to split lots of them up into 2. And so when you got to that last movie and it was split into 2, it really feels more to me as a viewer like, because the pacing is slower in those movies than it was in the rest of it. And so first of all, it makes the whole experience lopsided, especially if you marathon it. And secondly, when you watch that movie, it's really hard, at least for me. It was difficult to watch that movie and not think they split this into 2 so that they could have one more. Because if it was I cannot imagine how in the world we would do this in 2.5, 3 hours. It would have been nice if they had thought that with some of the others, where they gutted too much out of 4. A lot of people said they gutted too much out of 5, which was the one of those that I liked the most, having not read that particular book. And a lot of people that love that book didn't like the movie anything like as well as I did because they gutted so much.
Which one was that?
Maybe they should have. Prisoner of Azkaban's 3. 5 is, I forget the name of it. Goblet of Fire's 4 or 5. Anyway, it's the one before the one that's all about. See, now I'm not in Harry Potter mode right now.
There's a switch that you.
Yeah, exactly. There's a Harry Potter switch. It's
Guardian videos.
Yeah. Whatever. I don't remember the name. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
You know, the thing about Harry Potter, the last two movies, is that I felt
it's the one with the creepy lady that makes you write on that makes you write on paper and then it etches into your arm. It's that one.
The thing about those last two movies is that I felt like the second to last movie, Part 1, Deathly Hallows, was had no rising action after a certain point in the movie.
Yeah.
Like, they get to some point, now it's just kind of moseying around being mopey. And it's so tonally dismal that it's hard to really start caring about these people in the last part of that movie. And then, of course, you get to the second movie.
Or at the very least, it's hard not to just adjust in your seat a lot. Like, that was the difficulty I had with it, yeah.
I got bored.
Yeah, me too.
I don't care. Like, and it's not to say that these people aren't interesting, because, you know, I've gotten to...
You've been with them the rest of this time, yeah.
Waited through all of these movies to get to this point. I'm still interested.
But it feels decompressed compared to all the truncated ones, right?
Yeah.
You can't truncate, and then decompress. You know, if you're suddenly in your last movie like that going to split into two, then it's gonna feel like it's paced more like those other ones. It's got to, like, almost to be consistent. It's almost got to feel like it's moving too fast. You know. Yeah. So when he mentions that they're doing this with Hunger Games, now I've not read those books. I'm watching the movies. I loved the new one, and I find myself thinking this might make sense with that one. You know what I mean? I mean, we'll see. You know how slow it feels. But given that the second one, Catching Fire, ends on a big cliffhanger and feels almost like a Matrix 2-esque cliffhanger, where it stops just abruptly, and you're like, holy crap! I hope the next one comes out like tomorrow. You could kind of maybe see it, but I'm not gonna know until I've seen it. But to be fair, even though I haven't read the books, I do feel like those movies don't feel as truncated as the Harry Potter movies do. At least some of them. I don't know. You know,
with Hunger Games 2, I thought it was good. I liked it quite a lot.
Oh, did you see it?
And the thing about Hunger Games 2 is that I felt like it was all second act, which isn't necessarily a problem.
That's the thing. I think it is. Yeah.
Because I didn't feel like there was an opening act and a closing act. I felt like there was rising action. But there's no conclusion. There's no resolution. And
that's one of the reasons
I
liked it, was because I felt like we were watching the second part of a story.
Yeah. Because the first one you get a whole movie. And this one is like, that first one wasn't just a whole movie. It's going somewhere.
Until you put it with Catching Fire. And I feel like when you go back and watch the first one with that in mind, it's not going to feel as much like a whole movie because you know where it's going, right? So it does stand alone, but then it also serves as a first act. The question is, if it is going 3-act formula, how do you split a third act into 2 parts?
Yeah. That's where I'm kind of nervous, but I'm hoping that, because I feel like there's some things that weren't entirely necessary to show in the second movie that they omitted. I didn't read the books. I didn't watch the books either.
Who knows?
But so who knows? The people who have read the book. But I felt like they had an essential amount of information in there, but did have space to where they could have put other things in and spread it out. Not to say that they needed to spread it out, but rather to say that it might have merited having more plot, more... because I felt like we had adequate character development, which is something that I felt really strongly about with the Ender's Game movie, was it had good character development, but there were certain plot points that I thought, the book was better because it had these things in it.
Right.
And we just don't have enough time for those things. So if they're going to split it into 2 movies, they might as well have made it in 5 parts.
Yeah, because I mean, with that movie, I felt like with Catching Fire, I felt like we were exploring ideas. At no point does that feel rushy to me.
Yeah.
Like Ender's Game at points did, which is the only bad thing I can say about that movie because I loved it. But yeah, it's rushy in places. Getting to other examples that he mentioned, he brought up Dark Knight Returns. This is a totally different ballgame because first of all, that's one where we're splitting one story into two parts, and that's something where there's not gonna be any more. And so then the question there is, could we have made one movie and done that as effectively as that was done? And I say no. I was so relieved that we got 2 parts for that, and again, this is just a totally different topic, really, but we'll broach it because you mentioned it. There's 2 big reasons for that. One of them is, well, actually, these are related reasons, but one of them is with these DC Direct movies, they keep trying to adapt things that are longer than they have the time affordably to make. They're only allowed to do 75, 80-minute movies because their budgets don't allow them to do any more of animated footage than that. You can almost put a dollar amount to 1 minute of that kind of animation, and that's what they've done. So they say you have this budget, and that means you can't go past this running time. So they haven't been doing a great job with some of these of choosing material that they can do in that amount of time without being truncated. You and I have talked about this a lot. You look at All-Star Superman, that movie had that problem. There's a lot of them like that.
Marvel even had a problem with that with Planet Hulk.
Yeah, and then and then with some of them they got away with it because they picked the right material. Red Hood was something you could do in 80 minutes. Dark Knight Returns. And I'm sorry, Batman Year One. You could do in 80 minutes. It's a short piece. It's not several issues. It's a graphic novel and it's short and you can do that in 80 minutes. But Dark Knight Returns, you need more of a running time. The nice thing though is when you put both of those movies together, you don't feel like you have an overly long movie. You feel like you have a normal length movie, and all they did was cut it off at the halfway point. So
wow.
Have you not seen it?
No.
Okay, so it's really good. So basically, it is one movie, and they just cheated so that they could make it by putting it in two parts. I think that's fantastic.
Me too. I like that.
Yeah, that's really good. So it's not two movies. They called it Dark Knight Returns Part 1 and Dark Knight Returns Part 2. It's not two movies. It's a
Part 1 and Part 2?
It's a serialized narrative cut into two parts. Is all it is. And they just released a version recently. Yeah. Where you can buy it all together and it just watches together without a cut straight through because it's one movie. I think that's great.
Me too.
And I would love to see more things done that way in animation. Now the question is, should we be doing that very often with movies? I say yes, depending on what it is. Sure. I say if you have a novel, for instance, that you want to adapt, let's say you have like a 700-800 page behemoth that you want to adapt into a film, and to get to really do it justice, it's gonna make for a 4, 5, 6 hour movie. I say, yeah, you could cut it into two movies. You know what else, though? Shoot it together and put them out like 2 months apart from each other.
I wouldn't even necessarily say that they have to be 2 months apart from each other.
But they need to not be a year apart from each other if there's a big cliffhanger like that. You see what I'm saying?
You know what I think they should do?
Like, I wish, I got to the end of Catching Fire and I said, God, I wish this would come out next month. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying Lord of the Rings needed to come out that way, even though it was all shot together, because those are distinguished, at least the way they were published. Now, to be fair, Tolkien wrote that as one big thing, and it was cut into 3. But considering the fact that it was published into 3 things, I can see waiting a little bit between them. That's okay. They stand alone, to a degree, kind of, a little bit. But not something like Dark Knight Returns, right? Like, you wouldn't want to see a movie like that where it just ends at the halfway point. There's no resolution, nothing.
Yeah, that would
and
drive me
then
nuts.
you have to wait 2-3 years to see the next one. You wouldn't want that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I had a thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And I was all excited about it. It's your fault!
Is it my fault?
This is malarkey!
I'll wait. You'll think of it.
Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic. I'm not going to rip off SNL. I'm not going to use their joke.
I'm just waiting for you, dude.
I have no idea. Please, carry on, my wayward son. We'll figure this out.
Well, so if you went to a movie...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, what they ought to do is, and I realize that they put out one movie, see if anyone cares, and then they'll start putting out the rest. Like, oh, look, we made part 1 of this 3-part series. Does anybody care enough for us to make number 2?
Financial risk, yeah.
So, what they ought to do is develop a plan for the whole series. They say, we know what's come out so far. We're going to make it in this many movies. And we're going to say, well, what do we need to do in order for this plot to make sense? Does it make sense to release it in this number of movies? And then they have a future plan. They say, okay, let's make this movie. So they make number 1. And then they have a plan as to where else to go so that they don't end up having, the 3-part itis or whatever they call it. 3rd movie problems.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be once they get past part 2, what was it? Kevin Wilmot once said to me, anybody can write a good first act. And it seems to be that that's the case, is that you get a good first act, then you get some rising action in the second act, and then when you get to the third act, it all falls apart.
Because you don't know how to end it. You don't know where you're going.
And that seems to be the problem with these movies, is
with
that
trilogies,
they can make one movie that's good. They can make another movie that bridges the gap between that movie and the next movie, and then that movie sucks.
Well, and we've talked a lot, about like make a movie and then think about franchise after it's successful. Don't think about franchise right away. Make a good movie. But with what we're talking about, you almost can't do that, right? Yeah. Like because what we're saying is, if you have to make like the definitive be all end all truncated version of something that you oughta that you need, because I always say, if it takes 6 hours to tell a story, it takes that long to tell that story. You know what I mean? Like I always go to this example. People complained that Dark Knight was 2.5 hours. Well, if it took that long to tell that story, then as long as you remain invested, and then that's where the taste things come in, right? But you shouldn't say movies can only be this length, because you're usually blocking yourself off into a formula at that point, because a 2-hour movie or an hour and 45-minute movie or whatever, it's hard to branch out from the 3-act formula, to not be super formulaic, if you have to always stay that short. So I don't know. I feel like there are different genres that are there are different mediums rather, where different kinds of stories make more sense to tell in those, right? A lot of what we're talking about, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, these are things that would have been better served as television miniseries if money were no object.
Yeah, indeed.
The issue is, in order to put them on the grand scale that you'd like to see them, in order to make the lavish sets and the things that it requires to make those look great, you need a movie budget. So the thing is, we sink the kind of money into movies that we just can't into television, because the way they make their money back is different, is at least somewhat different. And so that's where the issue comes. So what we want to see is things on the length scale of a TV miniseries put into movie theaters and spread out over time. That's a huge financial risk, and so that's why I think you're starting to see so many of these things where we wait until the end and then we split one off into two, because at the beginning we didn't know that it was going to be like a huge powerhouse. We didn't know that Harry Potter was going to necessarily be a phenomenon when we put out the first one, but then when it was, I would make the case that you should go case by case, and that 1 and 2 felt like good length films for what those stories were. I don't feel like they needed to be much longer than they were. But then once you got to 3 and 4, I feel like they could have expanded them. I feel like 3 could have been half an hour longer, and a lot of people said, well, these movies are for kids, and so they need to be a certain length, and kids won't sit that long. I can kind of understand that, but when it's something like that, I feel like 2.5 you could get away with over 3. But that movie could have been longer. I also feel like 4 could have been 2 movies. So. I don't know. I guess this would feel less financially gimmicky if it didn't always happen with the last one.
Yeah. And then there are some things that just straight up don't need 2 pieces at all.
Well, I think I'm
not going to say Twilight.
I'm going to assume you saw those, because did you see those?
Twilight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them both.
Okay, so because I stopped after 2 and said I'm not doing this anymore, and for reasons we won't go into, I know you saw all of them. So how drawn out was it?
What's interesting is that when you get to the end of the third movie, it really does feel like you can end a movie here. I'm not saying that there was enough in the movie to merit making that a whole movie. But there does feel like, it is kind of a cliffhanger, but the movie is building towards this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of wasted scenes. The movie could have been entirely shorter than it was, but I was a little surprised at this midpoint of what is apparently the third book was a midpoint and could end a movie.
Interesting.
I said, wow, well, look at that. What do you know? That wasn't terrible. Well, the rest of the movie was, but the ending wasn't.
Well, I'm glad you had one positive thing to say.
And I'll say this, because I have to share it.
Okay.
I went to see part 2 with somebody who was just too drunk to be in public. And they had this guy, this character who's supposed to be Transylvanian or whatever, but or he's supposed to be Greek, I think is what it was. But he sounds like Dracula.
Really?
Yeah, he's supposed to be Greek. And the guy sitting next to me, we're watching this movie, and the character says, "There is only one thing I like to do." And the guy sitting next to me goes, "Count! 1, 2, right in the middle of the theater." Everyone laughed. That was a great experience. Like, people were just laughing at all of the ridiculous stuff.
When you did that impression, I was like, why does he sound like Chekhov from Star Trek?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
He's like, yes, and vampires come from Russia.
Vampires, that great band that got turned into vampires.
The nuclear vessels. Well, anyway. Well, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Oh, I think what story, I think his question, was what story elements were necessary to make a 2-part movie.
Yeah, or just what elements in general, yeah.
And I think that I'm still holding with what I said at the beginning of the video. I think that's it for me.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this one is somewhat cut and dry, right? But it's interesting to explore it. Yeah, I'd love to see it happen with an ongoing franchise before the final part, because it would feel like more of a valid choice. And at the very least, I'd love to see things not being milked for all they're worth. I understand why Lord of the Rings was made the way it was in the first place, and also one thing I can really, because I like Lord of the Rings, something I can it's not my cup of tea, but it's good, you know. Something I can really say for those is that I think it's great that there are these much longer extended cuts that went to DVD. Like they put out, I don't know if you've seen them, Vince, but they put out like they made a lot of sequences for all 3 of them that they just didn't feel like audiences would sit for in the theater. So the extended cuts, they're like at least 4 hours a piece. Oof. So I mean, like they did this. It's just they didn't put them in the theater. So I think that's commendable.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that even with those cuts, it doesn't look super, super lopsided when you do The Hobbit in 3 parts.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't think it's quite fair of us to completely criticize that until we've seen all 3 parts, because we do know that they're going to some notes and adding things that weren't in the book. Yeah. So the fact that they're putting in some stuff that where else would you put it, but people might love to see it on screen, I can see that. I can understand that. This is more complicated than you guys are milking it for too much money.
And that's why
you didn't say The Hobbit was. You didn't say the first one was bad.
No, I didn't say the first one was bad. I said I was hopeful for the other 2.
Yeah.
I think the first one is not a whole movie. It's a bunch of sequences and a bunch of unnecessary scenes that are leading you to what I think is probably going to be, or what I'm hoping is probably, the actual first movie.
But if you'd seen that movie and knowing what it was, knowing it was going to be a trilogy and that it was one complete story, if you had seen the first part and it felt like the first act of a 3-act movie, I don't think you would have begrudged it that.
No, I wouldn't have done that. This just felt like let's take the opening sequence of The Hobbit and stretch it for all we can get.
Yeah. Well, Vince, should we go to rants?
Yeah, sure.
What is your rant this week, sir?
My rant is that I didn't like The Hobbit. No, I'm kidding. My actual rant, this is such a dumb rant. Okay. My problem is, when I go frame shopping, when I go looking for frames...
Do you do this on a regular basis?
Not really.
Is there a great deal of frame shopping in your
But it seems to be like I'll have... my wife loves home decor stuff. So we have gone... In fact, Michael's had this terrific sale the day after Black Friday, which was buy one, get 2 free, which was a heck of a deal. So we went out there and we bought like 9 frames for a pretty decent price.
Anyway. Our videos have become much different since we both got married.
That's fair. So I have a bunch of geeky stuff that I wanted framed. You know, I've spent enough years in my bachelor pads, varying apartments that I've moved from, where I would decorate the place with posters hung up by Handy Tack. So now I have some original art. Now I have some prints and things.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, well, these are kind of neat, and I would like to get these framed. And so you go to Michael's, because they have good deals. And you go to, any place, and they have these standard-sized frames. And, you can get giant ones, you get little ones, and they are standard sizes. Now, then you go to the artists who make these things, and they make these weird lopsided things that don't fit any frame ever made by man. And they're like, well, you need something forged by Hephaestus in order to use this picture with a frame. And I go, are you serious? Malarkey! So, I get annoyed when I have these really interesting art pieces that I cannot frame because they don't have frames that fit them. And they're like, well, why did you get a frame that's 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide? I said, because they don't make things this big. Like, your picture's this dang narrow.
Yeah.
And it's 6 feet tall. But the only thing you can find... I'm entirely exaggerating for those of you who are like, well, that's not true, because I found a frame. No, it's not true. What is true is that they don't make things that are sized appropriately. Now there are people out there who are aware or in the know. They're like, well, if you go to the back of Michael's, they have a place where you can buy frame and have it cut.
I think there are people out there saying, how in the world is this your brand?
Yeah, it is. Like, you can go and you can buy frame pieces and have them cut and then put together and then put glass in there. Yeah, but you know what? First of all, that's really expensive in comparison to just buying a frame.
Yeah.
And secondly, I don't feel like I need to go buy specific type of frame cut for my Blues Brothers 2000 poster. That's all I'm saying. It's not that good of a movie to merit that. Granted, the Blues Brothers 2000 one was of a standard size.
I don't know if it's...
I digress.
I don't know if that's a good enough movie to put it on your wall.
Yeah. You know, I have these things. I'm like,
I have to question some of the things that you're putting on the wall versus some of the posters you decided you didn't need anymore and gave to me. Like,
yeah, that's fair. Well, also, I knew...
Thanks for that X2 poster, because that made that room.
I had a lot of posters over the years. I used to just... plaster my walls, not literally plaster, but you couldn't see any wall really through my posters.
I think that's the mark of a kid or teenage geek, right? Like, I think geeks do this. Like, we can't have... I don't want to speak for everybody, but I feel like a lot of geeks do this, where like, you know, you can't have any space on the wall between, like, if there's white at all whatsoever, it's you got to cover it. Like, that's at least that's how I was. Like, back when I used to keep all my action figures in package, I mean, you saw my old apartment.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's true. You know, for me, though, I
couldn't have a conversation with Vince back in my old apartment because before I got married, because he would be so distracted. Like we'd be hanging out in my place. I'd be like, Vince, you've been here 12 times.
Like, yeah, but I haven't finished looking at all your stuff.
I've archived it all in my brain.
Jay has this Christmas present. I knew he didn't have it.
That's a great rant, though. I've had the same thing where you're just like, how am I gonna frame this?
It just annoys me.
Have you done what I've done, where you get frame where, like, you can't find the frame that's the right size for? I can't believe we're talking about this. That's not the right size for.
So you go a step up.
So then you go a step up and you just like put some kind of like neutral color behind it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I've done that in here with a couple things. You know, I put white behind.
You have things like you can just flip that little advertisement they have. Like,
you do that too?
This is the name of the company. So you put in a faux matte. Now, also for those of you who are like, you could just buy a frame and then have it matted. I'm like, yeah, but that costs extra money too.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good idea. For the stuff you really, really care about, that would make sense. Yeah.
Now I have these two concert posters. This is the spawn of this. No reference intended. This is the spawn of this rant of, I have these two Blues Brothers concert posters that are about that big. And you know what? They don't make frames that size. For those of you who are like, yeah, they do. No, they make frames this size. But they make frames this big.
I was like, are you even on frame right now?
They make frames this big, intentionally off frame, but they don't make frames this big. They just don't do it. And I could find things that were the appropriate length, but not the appropriate width. And... fortunately, most every frame was the appropriate depth. So, moving on. What's your rant, Cap?
Well, Vince, going to comics for a minute. Something's
actually geeky.
That was geeky because we were talking. Actually, that turned into super ultra geeky. But So anyway, that's logistically geeky. So anyway, Vince, looking at Marvel right now. the point thing is getting out of hand. Like,
Yeah.
what is going on with that? Like, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's getting goofy. When it, and I thought it was goofy before, I gotta make up a new word now. It is 8 shades of preposterous at this point. Like, when it started, excuse me, by the way, for those of you that don't know English very well, preposterous was already a word. When this whole point system thing started, it made sense theoretically. The idea was we would put out a comic book that was like something whatever 17.1, and it would be not number 17, not 18, but an issue that would make for a jumping on point. So if you picked up, they did this with a lot of things when it started. So if you, and I can't think of a specific example right now, but if you because I'm not nerdy enough to remember every number of everything I ever purchased. But I mean, like when you, well, I was gonna mention Ghost Rider, but that's not a good example because they did the .1 before they actually started the series, which is another thing that irritates me. But when they started this whole initiative, the idea was that it would make for a jumping on point. So you could treat it like kind of a number one. You would read it, and then it would catch you up to speed. It would be a story on its own, but it would catch you up to speed so that we don't have to do the old school thing of every issue we do a bunch of recap to irritate the people that have been keeping up, but catch up the few people that happen to be picking it up at this particular random number, right? So it was a good idea. It kept us from what I loved about it was that it potentially kept us from having to renumber all the time, except that it didn't help that because we still do that all the time because we know that number ones always sell better, and so these days, especially with Marvel, it seems that whenever we bring on a new creative team, we tend to renumber because it's going to be a new direction, it's going to be a new story, and a lot of people that aren't as savvy about comic books as you and I are, Vince, don't understand that a new creative team is almost always a good jumping on point. It's almost always like the next story is not going to have a ton to do with what happened before it. That's not always the case, but often it is. And so we start the numbers over. Anyway, what the point thing has turned into now is a gimmick for lots of different things. And the big one is, and I do not understand this, because this seems counterintuitive with the whole number ones always sell better thing. If we were gonna make it a mini-series, but then we, for whatever reason, decided it would sell better as the main title name, we go .1, and then .2, and then .3, and then... That is ridiculous. Because it makes your collection look really silly. If you're a collector, that is obnoxious, I think. Yeah. And they started... I don't know if you agree with this, I think it's dumb. And this started...
I would agree with that.
The first thing I saw this happen with was Fear Itself. Fear Itself finished up, I forget if it was like 6-7 parts, I forget. Fear Itself finished up, this was a couple years ago, and then they were going to do these one-shots, I think they were going to be one-shots, that were supposed to jumpstart you into these new series that were bridge-off points from Fear Itself. So you would read, like one of them was for Jason Aaron's Incredible Hulk. You would read the .1 issue, and then it would jump you into the new series. Back in the day, we used to just call the jumping on point for a brand new series number one, but whatever. So the whole idea there was here's what happened with here was the aftermath of Fear Itself that leads us to the status quo we are at the beginning of Jason Aaron's run. Okay, what they ended up doing was they had an Incredible Hulk one, a Captain America one, I think, or a Bucky one, and a Iron Man one. I think is what it was. It's been a while. And what they did with that was they changed their minds and said we're going to make it .1, .2, and .3. Okay, that is completely different from what the .1 initiative was, and now it looks like those are part of Fear Itself. In fact, if you had a pull list at a comic book store, your comic shop owner was probably going to put those in your pull list because they are technically part of that series. But they're not actually part of that series. So, it's weird. So if you're a collector, it is a way for them to try to coax you into buying things you wouldn't otherwise buy, because they're technically part of that roster. So, then Venom did it with Circle of 4, and we got to, I forget if it was issue 23 or what, or which issue it was, but then it was .1 through .5. That Circle 4 was originally just supposed to be a mini-series that was a Venom, Ghost Rider, X-23, and somebody else, and then they put it in Venom. Well, Venom was only a quarter of that story. It wasn't even primarily about him. It was about these 4 protagonists together. It's not a Venom story, but they put it in Venom and did this .1 thing. Well, here's how out of control it's gotten now. to set up a bunch of new books that Marvel now is about to put out. And understand, I love Marvel right now. They're putting out a lot of great stories, but I just don't like the way they're numbering things, is all I'm complaining about. Vince, they're about to start putting out things called Point Now. That's dumb. I'm sorry. Any way you slice it, that's really strange.
Well, for a guy who likes to read miniseries, how am I supposed to know that 17.1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are a miniseries?
Yeah.
How am I supposed to know that? Why wouldn't I buy that? I mean, first of all, if number 1 sell, then why wouldn't you buy number 1 of the miniseries?
They're doing it right now. That's exactly what I'm saying.
That's stupid.
I guess the only thing I can think of, like from a marketing standpoint, is that somebody. This is all I can figure, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is just me spitballing. The only thing I can figure, Vince, is that the people at the top making these executive decisions think that they can get more money out of the collectors doing it this way, thinking that they have to be completists, than they can out of the people that like to try a new series. I would love to know if that actually is true on paper. And even if it is, it just seems silly, and I wish we wouldn't be doing it. But if they have numbers that tell them that, I could sort of see the logic in it, at least from a monetary standpoint. But like, they're doing this right now with Amazing Spider-Man. We haven't had Amazing Spider-Man for over a year because of Superior, and then suddenly they put out this miniseries that is a weekly thing that's going on right now. By the time this video comes up, it might be over. That is a Peter Parker story that I haven't started reading it, so I don't know when it takes place, but it's a Peter Parker story, not a Oxspidey story. And so originally, I think Dan told me it was supposed to be called Peter Parker Spider-Man. It was going to be a 5-part miniseries, and I think people would have bought that. But instead, they made it Amazing Spider-Man 700.1 through .5. And I really wish they hadn't done that. But the thing is, if you were collecting Amazing Spider-Man, it technically counts, so everybody that collected Amazing that haven't bought a Spider-Man book in a year and a half might potentially buy it. And maybe that's the wisdom. I don't know. But I don't know.
Why not just call it Amazing Spider-Man 7 blah 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 blah? Why not just make it the next issue?
Well, that's a great question. No, I mean, yeah,
Why
sure.
not?
Why not? I don't know. That's a great.
If you're starting at the end, start with the numbering. Who cares?
Who cares? I mean, I guess what they would say is it would confuse people because that used to be a double shipping book or a monthly book. It's been double to triple ship.
And the point one's not going to confuse the crap out of them.
Yeah, that's going to confuse them too, though, right? Yeah, so
stupid.
I know, but that's what they're doing now, and I feel like this is only going to get crazier. Especially when we get to Point Now. That's not even a number! Point Now?
I'm waiting for Point Then.
You know what I can't wait for? DC and Point 52. That's what I'm waiting for.
Point 52.
Yeah.
Like, well, what happened to Point 51?
What happened to Point 51, yeah. And you know what else?
See Point 1 to Point 50.
DC has started adopting the Point 1 thing. Now, I haven't seen them go as far and crazy as this, but Point 1 was a Marvel idea, and DC just stole it. I think that's hilarious. But yeah, I just wish that it was used for what it was originally intended for, because I thought that was a good idea. Anyway.
That was a great topic. So, on to rants.
Yeah, I know. We could have done a whole video on Point Now. But,
stupid!
Well, anyway. I wish I'd saved that.
Stupid.
Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching Geeks Not Nerds. Let us know what you think about taking stories and making them into multiple films. When is that a good idea? When should it be done? What do you think about the ones that have done it already? We'd love to hear from you. And also, if you have an idea for a future video we might make, leave your topic suggestions or your questions in the comments. Thanks as always for watching. We sure appreciate it. Oh, and you know what else I should mention? I should have said this earlier. If you have suggestions for videos, would you please send them as a personal message instead of a comment? You can leave them as a comment if you want to, but I may not see it because the comment system these days with Google is wonky. Sometimes even when I check them, I don't see some of the comments that get posted. And I know every YouTube producer is having this problem. If you send it to me as a direct message, I will absolutely see it. So if there's something you really want to make sure, this one from today from Laser Dude came as a PM. I may never have seen it otherwise. So and I'm not reading every single comment like I used to. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about that, because it's just so much more cumbersome to find them than it used to be. So if you so first of all, send us questions through personal message on Geekvolution. Secondly, if there is something you really want to make sure I see, either a comment that you want to make or a question you have, please send it as a personal message, because I no longer can promise you that I'm going to read every comment. It's harder and more time consuming now than it used to be. But I still want to keep this in open forum with everybody. So if I didn't read your comment, it's not because I don't care. It's because they're just hard to always find now. Anyway, so I'm glad I got that in there, because that needs to be said. Anyway, well, thanks again, everybody. We sure appreciate you watching, and we'll be back with you once again next week. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local comic book store, regardless if there's 0.1 or 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's not the retailer's fault.
Yeah. Go in there and look at those miniseries.
Thanks, guys. See ya.